we've got the very first person who called in here is Stella, who is an agnostic druid. So it even says in the call screen, not really a theist, but would like to argue about religious rituals that are helpful for dealing with grief and other strong emotions. That's actually kind of interesting from an anthropological perspective. Yeah. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit. And then immediately after that, we're going to jump into a pure theist call. So let's start with Stella. You're on the line with Forrest and Durante. How are you doing today?
Not bad. How are you?
Never had a bad day.
I love that.
Yeah. Jealous, but it's good.
So, do you have a particular thing? Because I could ramble on about ritual and about what they're for and what they do and how they look the same and all these sorts of things. But I'm interested in your take. Like, what specifically are you interested in approaching here?
Well, so there's a lot of different religious rituals on a lot of different religions, and some of them can be helpful. But then I don't know if using these rituals to process emotions helps solidify that religions are good, but they also can be helpful. So I'm just kind of arguing that they can be helpful, but I don't know the extent of how helpful that can be.
Yeah. So I've already got some notes. Darante, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
Okay. I'll start because I feel like you're going to have more than me on this one. Okay. So I'll start just to hit it just very quickly. And that is I do 100% agree. Ritual is a very human experience. It's a very human practice. It's something that we've always used and something that we're not separated from today. So even when we go to sports, today is the Super Bowl thing. People will be participating in ritual today. So I guess for me, the biggest thing is I don't see ritual and religion as necessarily one and the same. I know that religions use rituals, but in the same way that court systems use ritual, in the same way that politics use rituals, art use ritual. And so, no, I'd 100% agree that rituals are healthy and are absolutely helpful for humanity. My concern would be when we attach the misinformation of religious falsehood to those rituals, which would then sets people expectations for things that are not necessarily realistic. And I often remind people that disappointment is the child of false expectations. That's one of the main reasons I'm against falsehood. But other than that, no, I 100% agree that ritual is healthy, and that isn't something that we should see as automatically religious or superstitious. I'm very interested in what Forrest has to say on this, though.
Yeah, so I forgot that it was the Super Bowl, even though we literally just before we started the show remembered that it was, and then talked about how we never pay attention to it, and I had already within 5 minutes had forgotten that was happening again. So yeah, there's a few things here that I think are important. And the first thing is I'm going to say exactly what Darante just said. Ritual absolutely has meaning, has utility, in both an individual and societal level. But tying religion into ritual is where you get a lot of problems, and it's not a necessary hang up. And so some great examples of secular versions of ritual is if you look at Law and Order, how the way that our legal system works, especially in court, right? The way that you have this ritual of everyone stands up as the judge comes in and sits down, and then you have this gavel that they bang that doesn't really do anything. It's just very symbolic. And these kind of very, very symbolic things that carry weight with us because they're a part of our doxa. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. In terms of a coming of age and things like this, every coming of age ceremony or social a change in social hierarchy ceremony, they look more or less the same. You have someone who is removed from society, they change their identity, and then they are reintegrated with this new identity. You get a degree. You are now removed from everybody in this weird outfit with this stupid hat, and you have to walk across a thing and move a tassel, and then you are reintroduced as Dr. whatever, and this is your new identity. Same thing with a lot of coming of age ceremonies. You do the dance with the bullet ants in your gloves, or you smash a piñata, or you blow candles out of a cake, or whatever. A bar mitzvah, all of these things have this same kind of structure of being, you are isolated in a way, you have your identity modified, and then you are reintegrated into your group. And that's a very useful ritual pattern that is pretty ubiquitous across a lot of cultures for a lot of different reasons. And that's useful because it gives you that kind of closure of a chapter, and it tells you who you are now, and it's just meaningful for people. You mentioned grief. A lot of cultures will ceremonially wash a dead body. When a relative dies, they will wash their body, they'll braid their hair, they'll do their makeup, they'll clip their fingernails, they'll do all these things, which sometimes has a religious connotation, but doesn't necessarily. And that can be done completely secularly, and it's as healing as it would be otherwise, because it gives people, again, that closure. It gives them a little bit more intimacy with this person's body before they're gone. There's some cultures where they'll dig up the body every year and have dinner with it. There's cultures where they'll I remember this one, I can't remember off the top of my head, but like I remember in arc theory class we talked about this one culture where they would like exhume the body after a certain amount of time and take just the skull and like encrust it with stuff, and they'd stick it in a little alcove in the wall, and that's where grandma lives now, you know what I mean? And like all these things, there's an interesting discussion to have about like their comprehension and concept of what life and death mean, and how they have different dualisms than we do. But more importantly, it's just highlighting this secular ritual of how you treat death, how you treat growth, how you treat development, how you treat change, how you treat all of these things in a way that gives you kind of a crystallized understanding of it beyond what you would expect in a wilderness situation where someone just dies and rots on the ground and you move around, or you just are a different person today because you lost a leg and who cares, and whatever else it may be. All of that, this is the last thing I'll say because I've been rambling for a fucking minute. All of that, I mentioned the word doxa a minute ago. DOXA. Yes. So somebody's habits becomes the habitus of them and their surrounding civilization, their surrounding community. The habitus is just like the things, the motions that people do, the way that we do stuff as Americans, our particular creature comforts, the way we brush our teeth in the morning is all kind of the same and a little bit different than it would be for these other people over here. And then that gets you into what's known as doxa, which is sort of the unspoken but very deliberate rules of society. You go to see a concert, right? Where are you going to sit at that concert? Do you sit in the front row? Do you sit in the back row? Do you sit off to the sides? Do you sit in the balcony? You can think about this for a minute. Good chance you're not going to think, I'll sit on stage, because that's outside of the doxa. That's a totally reasonable thing to think, but that's outside of the rules, right? It's a reason why you don't eat a Kit Kat bar without breaking it apart first, because that's out of the doxa, right? And so that, I think, is where ritual really plays a big part, is it maintains this doxa, it maintains this cultural group collective behavior that makes us all feel connected and gives us that sense of community. But it doesn't necessarily have to be roped into, as Darante was talking about, this religious lie and this grift of like, okay, great, now pass the offering plate too, and also you go to hell. That's where it gets sticky. Stella, I've been talking for a really long time. Does all of this make sense to you?
Yeah. It's a really good stuff. I'll have to remember doxa. That is a great word. You had a lot of things about these like these secular rituals and stuff like that, but there are a lot of rituals that have like their basis in religions. Like a lot of funerals have their basis like the like families have been doing it this way in the specific church for like generations, and so like it's this ritual that's tied in with this religion thing, but there's also this it could be seen as could be seen as secular or religious as well. So I don't know if there's like is there any benefit to continue on that ritual that still has very, very deep ties with this sort of religious overtones, and like the preacher gets up and like talks about all of their stuff, and even like they could be a really nice preacher, but it's still very much Bible stuff thrown in there.
Yeah. I think that's an incredibly fair point. One of the things that I like to highlight to people from a sociological perspective is that when we talk about the difference between what is sacred and secular today, that is an anachronistic conversation. So you can't necessarily take that conversation and impose it on ancient religion, because in the ancient religious mind, there was no difference between sacred and secular. These two things were the same things. This is why I often remind people that there was a time where it was almost, I want to say, reasonable for humans to wonder about divine things, supernatural things, and all of these things. Because during a major part of human history, we didn't see that thing as this is something that happens outside of nature and we're inside of nature. In For a major part of for our anthropological relationship with the world around us, it has been secular and sacred has been the same thing. So the reason I say that is because, yes, while there are many things that seem to have a root in religion, I think the way you worded it just really hit it at what it really is, and that is tradition. They're not doing this because it is religious. They're doing this because this is what we have done. And I think that's something that the secular community could do very well to investigate, interrogate, and even appreciate at times, because that is one of the things that I've even called out about many churches that still call themselves Christian, that many of them are only Christian in name only. For the most part, what they are doing, what they are preserving, is a sense of ancestor worship. This is what our ancestors did. This is what those who did who before them, and it's that sense of preserving that. And I think if we spend time investigating that, we'll see that most people's attachments to religion are not truly religious, but are actually humanistic. Like one of the hardest struggles that people have from separating religion from ritual is not because they think God is going to be disappointed. It's typically because I'm afraid, great Graham is going to be disappointed because she's the one that taught me these things. And I do try to remind people that at the root of all religion, this is just from my perspective as a person who doesn't believe that there is a God, but at the root of all religion is absolute human intention and human imagination. And so I think we'll see that all the way down. What are your thoughts, Forrest?
Yeah, you said a lot of really important stuff there. Oh no, you're telling me. We're gonna go for several hours between the two of us. Yeah, so you said a lot of really important stuff here that I think is like key to expound upon. Number one is that like intro to anthropology, like the very first lesson you will learn is that you need to address the dualisms in your cultural heuristics and get rid of them if you're going to understand any other culture. And what we mean by dualisms, it is those dividing lines between what Darante was just saying, culture versus nature is a big one. Like, where does nature start and our culture begin? Because I guarantee it's going to look very different for different cultures, especially if you're looking at indigenous cultures versus cultures like ours.
Yes.
And so also life versus death and good versus evil and all these other things, like even the distinction between, as a biologist, I can tell you that the distinction between species fucking sucks. But as an anthropologist, I can tell you it's even worse. Like you get this really fuzzy line when you have people that are really connected to different like sigils and signs and symbology and animals and plants and all these things that like become a part of their cultural identity. And that's the biggest thing, that what you were just talking about was, this maintenance of tradition as a way of like, you don't want to disappoint your family, but much more than you don't want to disappoint God. That maintenance of tradition becomes a part of identity. And that's something I think is really important, not to change the subject too far, but we like to like poke fun at trans people and say like, oh, well, this whole self-identification thing. Self-identification is a major part of social identity as a whole. And it's not in any way unique to trans identities. It's like the whole fucking thing. And like, that's so big when you look at like ritual and tradition and like even religious practice that may not be considered religious practice. The Jewish tradition of ceremonially washing your hands before a meal. Microbiology exists beyond religion, y'all. It's a good thing to do. As well as you look at like ancient rules of like, don't eat shellfish. Well, why? It's because shellfish spoil really easy, and it's very easy to get some that are already gross without even knowing it. And there's a big allergy risk. You die a lot faster and a lot more often if you eat it. So it becomes a sacred thing to not eat it. It becomes taboo to eat it. You know what I mean? And so like you have these things that become like ancestral wisdom that then become divine wisdom that just kind of last for on and on. And then you get to a certain point that you don't even know why you're doing it anymore. You may have heard there's this old story, this really dumb like anthropology story of like this woman is preparing Christmas dinner, and she puts a ham in a pan. She cuts the end off the ham, and her daughter comes in and says,
Yes.
"Why'd you cut the end off the ham like that?" You know what I'm talking about? Yeah. And she's like, "Why'd you cut the end off the ham?"
Story.
That's what my mom did. And so they call the mom, and they're like, "Well, why you cut the end off the ham?" She says, "That's what my mom did." So they call the grandma, like, "Why'd you cut off the end off the ham?" She's like, "Because the pan didn't fit in the fucking pan. I had to cut the end off of it."
Yes. Yes.
So it's just this thing that gets passed down, and that's how rituals become religions. And so, like, yeah, especially when you have things that are tied into identity, tied into grief, tied into coming of age, comes into change, death, nature, nurture, all these other things. You get this happening long enough and with a big enough community and enough people who don't want to fucking explain it, and pretty soon you have a religion. And so, like, I think you've got a really, really deep thing to think about here. And I would encourage you, like, to dig into it further. I think you'll learn a lot of really cool stuff about your own culture that you may not have realized was this kind of way. I've got this one curl that I keep seeing on my monitor over here that's just bouncing like crazy. I'm going to kill myself about it. But, like, I encourage you to check that out. I think you'll learn a lot. I think you'll have a lot of fun with it, Stella. If these are the kind of questions you're asking, I think you'll be into it if you check it out more.
Yes.
Well, I love anthropology. It's really fun. I just don't have enough time for anything.
Also, I'm sorry if I can say one more very quick thing. Also, you mentioned religion. It's important to point out that because of all of this and because of what Darante especially was talking about, how like just like there isn't always this distinction between the mundane and the divine, and sometimes it's just the spiritualistic way of living, and it's not even considered a supernatural thing in this culture. That's one of the major reasons why religion is so impossible to actually define as a concept. We have a colloquial way of using it that makes sense, but like my intro anthropology textbook, which is around here somewhere, it describes religion as just like belief in things that are like imperceptible to the five senses. And that would mean that like microbiology and like any kind of medicine is a religion, and like it doesn't make any sense.
Physics is now religion.
Yes, exactly. But that's the best we can do. So that's just something you should also think about if you're talking about religion in any way, especially an anthropological way. That's something to consider as you're going along with it.
Yeah, that makes sense because, like I said, for this call screen, I'm like an agnostic druid, which is just like a word stuff that I put together for like how I view spirituality, I guess, and how I go through and think about like emotions and community and stuff like that, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get you. Well, I hope this was enlightening in some way, if not just a lot of just us talking. But I hope it helped in something. I hope you really get something out of this.
I got a lot of notes, so I will have to go read through a lot of stuff. Thank you.
Righteous. And feel free to call back anytime if you have any further questions. We'll talk to you soon, Stella.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Fun way to start the show.
No, I enjoyed that.
Thanks for watching that clip. Hey, we're trying to do some data research about whether or not our callers successfully proved that God existed. If they didn't, don't forget to like and subscribe. That's how we know they failed. But if you don't like and subscribe, you're saying that they succeeded. So you're saying that by liking and subscribing, you will be affirming that you are an atheist. Hey, what else should they do?
I don't know. Maybe go to patreon.com/calltheline and donate some of their hard-earned money.
Like and subscribe.